All right, let's start this one off. This is going to be one that's going to be good. This is the truth about long lenses. You know, just because you have a 600 millimeter, 800 millimeter, or even if you went and got the 1200 millimeter, doesn't mean just because you can see that bird or that animal that you should take the shot. And that's the moral, and that's the whole premise of this video we're going to have. So like, basically what I'm trying to say is that way back in the day, I thought if I had a 600 millimeter lens, I hit it. I was there. It was the Mecca. That's all I ever needed. I could shoot anywhere. I could get any bird. I could do whatever I wanted to do. Well, that's not it. Okay. So, you know, they're not like magic. You know, a 600 millimeter is not like an extender that is like magically going to get you tremendous wildlife shots. And in the birding world, it's even more of a science to get a great shot from such a long distance and keep feather detail, so on and so on. So like, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't get one. And you do need a long lens if you're going to be a professional wildlife photographer or, you know, or an aspiring wildlife photographer or whatnot. But, you know, the problem is with a long lens, it amplifies the issues. So, and what I'm trying to say with that is that they demand better conditions. They also reward for some bad conditions, especially the light. So, and I'm speaking of a 600 f4 at this point, because you're paying for the f4 and the isolation that the lens gives you. So there is very great reasons to have it, and there's a need for it. The 400-2.8 is an awesome wildlife lens, and that rewards you with the low light. So there's strengths and weaknesses to every lens. The autofocus is usually tremendous in a 600 f4. The isolation of the bird or the animal, as far as your depth of field and everything, tremendous in a 600 f4 compared to a zoom. But it's not buying a long lens is not going to fix distant wildlife photographs. It's just not. Like you can take it with a 600 millimeter Sigma 150 to 600 and you put it on a 600 millimeter f4 that's sharp as a tack, it might actually make them worse. I mean, I know that's a weird statement, but when they're that clear and you're using a high megapixel camera and the lens is that sharp, it amplifies the issue. So, you know, you got to let that one sink in for a second, you know. You know, there's 800 millimeters now. There's a Canon 1200 millimeter now. There's a lot out there, and there's a lot of problems with each one, and there's a lot of positives with each one. So I'm going to try to get a little bit into that. So let me see what I got here. I pulled up some charts, and I'm going to pull up this focal length chart right off the bat. So basically what this is it gives you the full frame, the ASP-SC, which is a crop sensor, and a micro 4/3 camera. And these are the equivalent distances. A 300 millimeter will give you 450, and then 600 and 4/3. A 600 millimeter will give you 900, and then 1200. So the list, this chart is easy to pull down. They're very easy conversions, but I thought I would just put that up there for you. Some people still use a crop sensor camera, and a 600, it's like a 900 millimeter. It's it's a great focal length. I use a medium format sensor, so mine actually reduce, which is the anti-wildlife move, but that's okay. I can deal with that. So basically what that is, you know, the biggest misconception is that you can get this lens and you can shoot whatever you can see. And you can. It's just, is it going to be a keeper? Is it going to be something you can print? That's the real question. And most people that spend $14,000 or $15,000 for a lens expect that that's what they're going to get. And that's not necessarily true. You've got the atmosphere that limits you. You have light that limits you. But with the f4, you kind of get that. The heat shimmer, it destroys the detail, and that's the atmosphere heat shimmer. The haze on a morning will ruin your shot also. And with a crisp 50 megapixel camera and a razor sharp 600 f4, you're going to get what you get. But there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. And there's a lot of stuff that will go wrong with your details, warm ground, midday sun, over water. In the summertime, they're really touchy. So, the funny thing is, you're not photographing the bird or the animal at that point. you're photographing the air and the temperature and everything that goes along with that. That's going to affect your image. And I'm going to give you a story, like a personal story about this, because I always had a 600 f4. I don't currently use one. I use a 500 5.6 Fujifilm, as people may know. But when I was a Nikon shooter, I had the 800 5.6 with the match teleconverter, which gave me around 1,000 millimeters. Questionably the best lens Nikon ever made, and I think maybe to this day it probably still is. That lens is absolutely a blockbuster piece of glass. Okay. I was at the dam. I was shooting eagles all the time at that point. I still do. But I figured, like, let's try it because maybe it'll get me a little more distance. It did not. Maybe it got me a little more reach, but the problem was that little more reach would still be impacted by all of what I mentioned above. And it was eye-opening to a point that you'd say that lens, I think, was almost $18,000 at the time. And I traded in so many different lenses to get that and a couple bodies and whatnot. But, you know, that lens had beautiful rendering, unbelievable isolation of the bird in flight. It was some of my best images I've ever taken were with that lens and the Nikon D6. Now, the caveat to that statement is those images were close. So what that does is it on a close image that I say you should shoot a bird when it's close, and any animal. It's not about the distance away. You want to still get one close. And what that's going to do is that compression of the lens on a close bird is going to make it even better. Better than anything else can provide. That's what a 600 f4 does. You're still going to take the same shot from the same distance as you would if you had a zoom, if you had a 2 to 500 or 150 to 600. You're still in that same zone. You shouldn't take a shot that's too far away. Obviously, the closer the better. And when it's at the perfect distance that you know that you work out with your lens, what is the right focal length for you? Where do you want to make that image? That's important. That's something you need to think of before you go out. If you're there and you're planning your shot and you know that about 65 yards is your sweet spot and that's where you want it and the light's good and you're set up, wait for the bird to come into that zone, fire away. That's my advice. It's always been my advice. I try to keep that in every workshop I do. You plan ahead and set yourself up for success. But with the 800, it gave me, 20 more feet, maybe 30 more feet, because I still wanted to keep it within that range. But my compression and boom, those photographs were phenomenal. That camera is phenomenal, you know. And so in a nutshell, you're paying for speed. The 800 wasn't an f4, but it was still a 5.6, and it did what it did, and it was a little bit more reach, and it did what it needed to do. But, you know, the 600 f4 is a gathering monster. It's a light gathering monster. The focal, 125 millimeter front element, as opposed to a 5.6 element, which is 95 millimeters, not that big, because it doesn't take in that much light. And we can do videos on lenses and whatnot. There's a million of them out there. But so now when you start to up that and you think that you're going to conquer all these issues with having a Canon and getting the 800 and the 1200. Well, the 1200 I think is a 6.3, the 800 is a 5.6. Well, now you got a low light lens that is a super expensive telephoto lens. It's really not a low light lens anymore. So then it's almost like you could have your 600 and just put a converter on there. It's what you really can do. And I'm not saying those lenses are just 600s with converters, but they sure look like it. I know that I'm probably speaking and I'm not a Canon shooter, but I feel like that's all those lenses are. And with teleconverters, we're going to talk about them, but like, it's just a reality check. You still need to crop with an 800. You still need to crop with a 600. You still need to crop. If you want close images like I shoot, you're still cropping, unless that bird is, 30 feet away, which I do get a lot, and that's fine. And then the detail's even better. But when I was going to the teleconverter situation is like, back in the day, everyone had a 600 f4 with a 1.4 on it. Gives you 5.6, 6.3. And if you do a 2x, you're at, f8, which isn't bad, but you do lose it with a teleconverter. It's not glass to sensor, you have that converter in there. Maybe it doesn't affect the autofocus that much and the speed. The Sony, it did not affect the speed that much. But if you really pixel peep, it does. And the acquisition, it's a little slower. Everything's a little slower. So I never did that. I didn't feel the need to do it. They do serve a purpose. They do. Teleconverters will serve a purpose. But it's I always say glass to sensor is the most sacred thing. When you put something between it, you just do the math. It's just not the same. The aperture is slowed down. It's never the same as just straight glass. And, teleconverter is a compromise, everyone. It's not an upgrade. It's definitely not an upgrade. It's a compromise. You're trying to get more distance, which I'm telling you is not good. And you're going to try to achieve something that you couldn't get with your 600 that you think you're going to get with a teleconverter. But then think about what you're saying. If you can't get it with your 600 with a 50 megapixel camera with a crop and your image is not good, there's no way that a teleconverter is going to do it. It's just amplifying the image. And here's another chart here. It's like, this is kind of what I have this chart where it says, this is a lens with a different sensor. So, this is the same thing. It's 200, 400, it's just amplifying the bird, but you're also amplifying all the issues. So, I know I'm not telling you anything new about that. That's just a visual for it. But if you look at some of these shots here, these are super close. These are with a 600 f4. Okay. This is shooting Sony. And these birds are 30, 40, 50 feet away, maybe 75 on some of them. Look at the feather detail, okay? Now, this other batch that I'm going to put up in a second, I'm just going to let these run for a couple minutes, or a couple seconds, sorry. And then this other ones, these are great shots. These are from a distance, but these are cropped way down. And then look at the difference in the feathers. So this is the same area, the same timing, but they're just further away. So when you really check them out close, these eagles, they're not, yes, they're the same and they do look good. And I know it's a little different and it's a little harder to tell on this screen that you're watching, but there's a difference. That's because it's a super crop and I'm further away. So the light was good. The conditions were good here. It's just, you're going to sacrifice in the distance. It's very easy to tell. And so I'm going to get, my advice is get closer, improve your field craft and your approach to the bird or the animal, learn their behavior better. You can kind of guess what's going to happen. You want to anticipate. You want to work with your light. The light is super important. If you're fighting the light or it's a backlit shot or the light's not good, and I'm not saying sun, sun is great at your back, but you can get great shots on a cloudy day. Your feather detail increases on a rainy day, even better. So, and that's another thing too. The 600 f4 weather sealed typically. They're great in the rain. You don't have to worry about it. I mean, you can cover them. I suggest cover them if you don't want to run the risk, but they're pretty good. I mean, and your atmosphere and your haze and that stuff you need to just be careful of. Shoot early in the morning up until about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. You want to go in, pack it up, and then come back around 3 or 4, depending on summer, maybe 5 or 6. So you want to play with the light and you want to use it to your advantage, and that'll only help you. It's going to make your lens perform better. I always say invest in fast glass. Fast glass is huge. Now in the wildlife world, there's 2.84 and 5.6 and then 6.3. So there's really nothing faster than a 400 2.8, but if you can afford it, by all means, a 400 2.8, a 600 f4. If you're a Nikon shooter, I would recommend the 800 5.6. It's not a Z lens. And I wouldn't say it's the 800 PF is not nearly as good as the original 5.6. But I'll tell you, if you get a D6 or a D850 and you're shooting that 800 5.6, I mean, it is a tremendous combo, absolutely tremendous combo. So in a nutshell, you don't need a 600 f4 if you shoot proper light and you do your field craft and you get close. But if you can afford a 600 f4, It is the ultimate lens for compression, your background, your bokeh, acquisition. The autofocus, I'm sure, is great. And you don't need a brand new one. Okay, so like there's another, one more misconception I'm going to leave you with is like, Nikon has had, I think, 4 versions of the autofocus, maybe 5 of the 600 f4. There's the old 600 f4, which I think is an AIS. I'm not quite sure. It's got the double hood. Then there's another double hood one. And the double hood one is absolutely tack sharp. It is so tremendous, the image quality in that lens. It's heavy, it's giant, it's long, it is top. I mean, everything is heavy about it, but you're shooting on a tripod back then. That's what we did. And then they came out with a newer version, which was a little lighter, and people started to hand hold them. And now you have the 600 f4 with the teleconverter built in. It's 17 grand. My buddy Andrew's got it. It's a great lens. It's beautiful. It's optically perfect. But all of those that I just mentioned, optically are pretty much all the same. Yeah, the autofocus got better and it got lighter, but necessarily is it better? I wouldn't say so. If you never ever left that double hooded Nikon 600 f4 and you use the converter on your Z cameras now, and you never shot the new one, you wouldn't know. And we were still getting images with those in the early 2000s when those lenses came out, and we weren't missing a ton. So, yes, but you can get a budget one. Get one on a budget. See if it's what you want and if it's going to give you what you need. A budget of a 400 2.8? What a deal. Canon, I know I am not a Canon shooter. I don't know about the lenses, but there's a ton of 600s, 500s, 500 f4s. There's the 400 2.8s. You can pick them up on a budget. Everyone's gone for the super light 8-9 pound lenses that they have out there, and they're great. Sony, you can't get one on the budget because they haven't really remade their 600 or their 400 2.8 as of yet. It's only been out for 6 years or whatever. But the Nikon Canon glass, you can get it at a deal, and I would strongly recommend it if you could. I mean, 16,000 is like buying a new Hyundai or a Kia. I mean, it's crazy to spend that if you're not getting paid. But to drop 3 or 4 on one on Marketplace or maybe KEH or whatnot, it might be worth your time to look into that. And there's some great copies out there. Marketplace, you can find someone who's babied it, that had it since it's been brand new. I wouldn't say that it's out of the question. So keep that in mind. Let me know your thoughts on it. I know a lot of you out there shoot that, but then there's a lot of people that don't. It used to be more of a rarity to have a 600 f4 back 15 years ago. Now it seems like everyone has one, but they're financing them, and there's Payo, Boo, and all this stuff. So a lot more people have them at the dam when we shoot eagles, and it used to be only a handful of us had them. But I just want to wrap this up by saying, learn your gear, learn your lens, and set yourself up for success. Whether it's good light, bad light, slow shutter, tripod, there's a million different ways to skin this cat. And I will help with anyone who has any questions. Please let me know. I appreciate you watching the channel, and please click subscribe and check out for future videos. 168 Wildlife on all social media, and look forward to talking to you next time. Have